worship. And now the word worship he's employing here is proskuneo. I want you to write that down. Proskuneo. So he's introducing us to two words here. The first hour is hora. And the hour, hora, again, it's not a literal hour. He is speaking of it figuratively, that the hour has come. Amen. It's a set time. It's an appointed time. It's a definite time. The hour. He speaks of an appointed time, a set time. It's up until his manifestation, it was coming. He says, and now is. That's why I want you to hone in on verse 23. Hour cometh is one dimension, and now is another. He said the hour cometh and now is. I don't want you to link them together. There are two separate events. They are two separate dimensions. They are two separate dispensations. Now, when you hear the word dispensation and dimensions, I don't want you to confuse the two. Don't mix them together, because there can be no new dispensation without moving into another dimension. Write that down. There can be no new dispensation without first entering into another dimension. You've heard me say the word dimension repeatedly. I frown on the word level because levels are too small. They're too shallow. The latitude and the longitude of levels, they're too shallow and too small. God does not deal in levels. And I wish we could eradicate that from the vernacular of the believer. Those who tout the kingdom must stop saying that he's taking us to another level. God does not take us to new levels. God brings us into new realms, into new dimensions. You know, office buildings have levels. Condominiums have levels. Parking garages have levels. Homes have levels. But God deals in dimensions. And so when we're talking about dimensions, and the only way to truly grasp the enormity of that, I want you to think about, again, outer space. Outer space with its endless galaxies, billions and billions of galaxies, infinite galaxies. Outer space reveals the inner space of God. It reflects the inner space of God. If you ever want to know what's in God, look outer space. Because outer space with its endless galaxies, it reflects the inner space of God with his endless dimensions of revelation. God is so vast. He doesn't live in eternity. We said that eternity lives in him. God doesn't live in space. Space lives in him. And because he's so vast and because he's eternal, he is both the beginning and the ending. Not the beginning and then the ending, but simultaneously, he is the beginning and the ending. He is the quintessence of a paradox. He is the first and the last. Simultaneously coexisting in him is first and last, beginning and ending. Amen. He is all of that. And dimensions are in him. He is that vast. And so you clearly see how it was possible for Lucifer to worship around the throne of God, but not yet access the heart of God. It is because all of this was top secret while he was plotting and God was planning. While he was committing subterfuge, he was ingeniously and brilliantly, he was navigating and orchestrating and planning. He had already planned in his mind, amen, and had already constructed a blueprint within him. It was top secret. It was highly classified. And so that was an area, a dimension that Lucifer did not have clearance to enter, and he did not have access to. And so when we talk about dimensions, that's what we're talking about. There are dimensions in God. Now, God doesn't, we don't just move and shift from one dispensation to the next or from one covenant to the next. That's not how it works. In order to go into another dispensation or enter into a new dispensation, we have to enter into another dimension, because once God opens up another dimension of himself, then he dispenses out and he releases. That's what dispensation. He dispenses out of himself and brings all humanity into another dimension of himself. And that is where we get new dispensation or another dispensation, a new covenant. We don't just go from old covenant to new covenant. Let's establish that. I know we said we go from old covenant to new covenant and we just flip the page. We go from Malachi to Matthew. This is the old covenant and this is the new covenant. That's not how it works. That's how we're looking at it in the natural and our finite mind. But that's not how it works. We don't just move from old covenant to new covenant. We don't just move from from one dispensation to another dispensation. All of that is preceded by God bringing us into a new dimension. Write this down. He brings mankind into a new dimension, and out of that dimension he dispenses and shows us and brings us into a new covenant. The hour cometh is one dimension, is one dispensation, and now is another, because you know what happened between the hour coming and the hour is? The word was made flesh. John chapter 1 verse 18 said, no man had seen God at any time. He says, but the only begotten Son, the Greek word is monogenes, the only begotten Son, in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. He was in the bosom of the Father. He was in a dimension of the Father that the enemy, serving and posing as an ally, could not get to. He could not see it. He could not access, amen, that dimension. And once God opens that dimension and the Word is made flesh, amen, and God sows the seed of a son in order to reap a harvest of sons. The word manifested as a son because God was intending on reaping a harvest of sons. And you cannot reap what you haven't sown. So in order for God to reap sons, he had to sow a son. So the word became a son, became flesh, manifested as a son, so that God sows the seed of a son so he can reap the harvest of both sonship and paternity.